Ukraine will not receive Patriot interceptor missiles from the United States of America, but the US has offered something else. Well, you could say it's the development of its own air defense system. At the same time, US intelligence is warning Europe about the threat of a Russian attack in the near future. On August 7, Donald Trump at the White House finally ruled out additional missiles for the Patriot system for Ukraine. There will be no missiles. And on the same day, it turned out that Washington is offering to compensate for this, in particular, by jointly upgrading old Soviet missiles for the S-300 systems. And all this is happening against the much more alarming backdrop of a recent US intelligence assessment that Vladimir Putin may soon test NATO's resolve with a limited invasion. Even before the war in Ukraine is over. Well, on the same day, Poland's foreign minister publicly spoke about the need to shoot down Russian missiles directly over Ukrainian territory, because Ukraine itself still doesn't have protection against them. In general, the West is still looking for ways to protect Ukraine from Russian ballistic missiles, especially since there clearly aren't enough Patriot missiles for everyone. My name is Pechii. Let's dive into this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, and leave your comments under this episode. So, let's start with the most direct statement from Trump about Patriot missiles for Ukraine. The other day, one of the journalists drew attention to the words of the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, who stated that Kyiv is in urgent need of ammunition to defend against Russian strikes. This was a conversation in the Oval Office, and here is what Trump replied. "We need these missiles ourselves. Joe Biden gave Ukraine $300 billion worth of ammunition. When I left, our warehouses were full, and now we're replenishing them." At the same time, he noted that the US has missile stockpiles all over the world, and if they are needed, as he put it, we will take them. The point is that, according to Trump, there are supposedly a lot of missiles all over the world, but they can't give them to Ukraine because they need these missiles themselves. And in general, there is a shortage. So, which version to believe is up to you. Commenting on the increased Russian strikes on Ukraine, Trump actually shocked everyone and said the following. "Listen, we have nothing to do with this. There is an ocean between us. But I don't like seeing young people dying." He added that he is working on ending the war. Quote, "I settled 8 wars. I thought this one might be one of the easiest, but it turned out to be the hardest. But progress will be made." Remember, this isn't the first refusal. It's a confirmation of an already made decision. The day before, the Financial Times, citing sources, reported that Trump refused to supply additional interceptor missiles for Patriot to Volodymyr Zelensky, even at the meeting in the White House at the end of July, when Zelensky asked to transfer 300 missiles to Kyiv for the winter. One of the reasons for the refusal, Trump said, was the use of these munitions to protect US facilities in the Middle East. Earlier, Zelensky requested a license to produce Patriot interceptors. This was discussed with Trump in early July during negotiations in Ankara. The US president initially indicated the license could be granted, but later refused, explaining, quote, "This is an absolutely exceptional weapon, and we need to be a bit careful about whom we grant licenses to. In fact, we do not license the production of weapons." Interestingly, before that, Trump denied media reports about a shortage of ammunition among American troops during the war with Iran. He emphasized that the US has huge stockpiles of missiles and threatened prison terms for those who spread information about an ammunition shortage. Now let's talk about what is being offered to Ukraine instead. The United States of America is working together with Ukraine to improve the ammunition for the S-300 anti-aircraft missile system which was created back in the Soviet Union. Retired Colonel Robert Hamilton told PBS this. Here is his direct quote. "Joint American-Ukrainian efforts continue, aimed at modernizing old S-300 missiles or creating a more modern version that will improve their capabilities." According to him, The upgraded missiles will be in service with the Ukrainian army by the end of 2026. And they will be produced in quantities of several hundred per year. This is supposedly enough to shoot down Russian ballistic missiles. The context here is not new. Back in September 2024, then US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, at a meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group in Ramstein, had already announced joint work on developing a replacement for the Soviet S-300 air defense systems and R-27 air-to-air missiles. So, the project has been ongoing for 2 years now and apparently is reaching its final stage just as the alternative route, that is Patriot, is still closed. At the same time, the issue of technologies for Patriot, that is the license for production, has not been fully resolved. US Congressman Mike Turner urged Donald Trump and the Pentagon to act as quickly as possible in negotiations on transferring interceptor production technology to Ukraine. As he says, this would allow Kyiv to set up production independently. But for now, this is just a call, not a decision. Meanwhile, Ukraine has been offered the chance to produce missiles for the S-300 systems. How realistic is it for the S-300 to replace the Patriot? That's a separate question, and we need to be honest here. These are fundamentally different systems in terms of their tasks, and upgraded missiles for the S-300 are just a stopgap, and not a full-fledged alternative for ballistic missile defense at the level the Patriot provides. But in a situation where Zelensky states that the supply of air defense missiles to Ukraine from Western partners in the first half of 2026 has decreased threefold compared to last year, then any additional interceptors already mean lives saved. And here is a quote from Zelensky. "Protection from the Russian missile threat is the most important task for preserving the lives of our people. All partners know how they can help and what they can provide. The untimeliness of aid and delays in the delivery of anti-ballistic missiles, that is exactly what leads to such destruction and casualties." He also emphasized the partners do have missiles. That is, the problem is not the physical absence of weapons, but the decision whether to transfer them or not. But Europeans may actually be afraid to transfer interceptor missiles because they fear that Russia might attack them soon. US intelligence has published a new assessment of a possible scenario of a Russian attack on NATO. According to new reports, Vladimir Putin may try to test the alliance's resolve with a limited offensive against an allied country even before the war in Ukraine is over. Previously, American intelligence believed that Vladimir Putin would not provoke a NATO country before the war in Ukraine was over, but that assessment has changed. As Vladimir Putin comes under increasing pressure both in Ukraine and domestically, in Russia, drones there are causing growing damage to the Russian army. The oil industry, warehouses are burning and so on, and Putin's forces are achieving less and less success on the front line while suffering heavy losses. It's obvious that Putin is starting to get nervous and is looking for new ways to escalate in order to de-escalate. The goal of a hypothetical attack on NATO in such a situation is simply to split the alliance, and here is a direct quote from the US intelligence report. "The threats may range from a cyber attack on a NATO country or sending unidentified armed groups to occupy territory to a limited invasion of the alliance's eastern flank." According to US intelligence estimates, any actions by Russia could take place between the fall of this year and 2029. The likelihood of the most extreme scenario, a limited ground invasion, is low, but according to reports, it increases over time. Such a move has always been considered unlikely, precisely because it would trigger NATO's Article 5 on collective defense obligations. But Article 5 does not clearly regulate the response to cyber attacks or hybrid threats, and it is precisely in this gray area, according to intelligence assessments, that Moscow is most likely to operate. Well, for example, look, drones and missiles have already struck Poland and Romania. Can this be called a direct attack? NATO believes it cannot, and accordingly Article 5 was not activated. And this is where the direct connection to the missile shortage becomes clear. These new assessments appeared against the backdrop of a shortage of some critically important munitions needed by the American military to confront Russia or China in a potential future war. The stockpiles of long-range precision missiles, Army tactical missile systems, and short-range Stinger anti-aircraft missiles are under threat. That is exactly the class of weapons that is currently lacking for the defense of Ukraine as well. Western intelligence considers the most likely direction of possible confrontation, along with military analysts and the leadership of the alliance's eastern flank, to be the Baltic states and Poland. American intelligence has already warned Warsaw about the risk of Russian provocations against the country's critical infrastructure in order to test NATO's response. And Lithuanian intelligence, let me remind you, believes that Russia may use captured Ukrainian drones to attack infrastructure in the Baltic region, in order to portray all of this as an alleged Ukrainian provocation. And finally, one more piece of news. Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski has called for discussing the possibility of intercepting Russian missiles while they are still over Ukrainian territory, without waiting for their possible entry into Polish airspace. The reason was the recent statements by former Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki, who spoke out against sending another batch of Patriot missiles to Ukraine, which Kyiv needs to shoot down Russian targets. Sikorski emphasized that Kyiv has been under massive attacks by Russian ballistic missiles for several days in a row, against which there is currently no protection, and the number of civilian casualties continues to rise. Let me also remind you that on July 30, a Russian Kh-101 cruise missile fell on Polish territory, 70 kilometers from the state border. And now the Deputy Minister of Defense of Poland, Cezary Tomczyk, noted after the interview that if earlier Russia launched up to 20 missiles during a single attack, then on the night of July 30 their number reached about 70, and about 20 of them were flying specifically in the direction of Poland. So in the West they are still looking for ways to protect Ukraine and themselves, including from Russian ballistic missiles. But this once again emphasizes that Ukraine itself must work on its own anti-ballistic defense as soon as possible. Otherwise, we will keep getting only what is left over in the West. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.